The sun hadn't fully risen over Blackridge when Mara Quinn's mother started in on her. "You'll wear the gray dress today, not the blue one." Mara stood in the doorway of the kitchen, still half asleep, her hair tangled from a restless night. "The blue one is cleaner. The gray one hides more." Her mother didn't look up from the pot she was stirring. Steam rose between them like a wall. "And for heaven's sake, tie your hair back properly. You look like you've been dragged through the dirt." Mara's hand went automatically to her head, fingers catching on knots. She tried. She always tried. But nothing was ever enough. "Yes, ma'am." Her mother made a sound, something between a sigh and a grunt, and Mara knew the conversation was over. She retreated to the small room she shared with her younger sister Bess, who was still curled under the quilt, pretending to sleep but definitely listening. The gray dress hung on a peg like a judgment. Mara pulled it on, the fabric tight across her shoulders, bunching awkwardly at her waist. She'd let out the seams twice already. There was nowhere left to go. Bess rolled over, eyes open now. "You could just not go." "And do what instead? Hide in here all day?" "Better than what they'll say." Mara tied the laces at her bodice, fingers clumsy with familiar dread. "They'll say it whether I'm there or not. At least you won't have to hear it." That was the difference between them. Bess was small, delicate, the kind of girl who could slip through a crowd without anyone noticing, the kind of girl their mother smiled at. Mara was the opposite, impossible to miss, impossible to ignore, impossible to forget. She braided her hair quickly, not bothering with a mirror. Mirrors only confirmed what she already knew. "Mara!" Her mother's voice cut through the thin walls. "The chickens won't feed themselves." Bess gave her a sympathetic look, but sympathy didn't change anything. It never had. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, the kind of morning that promised heat later. Blackridge sat in a valley between two ridges of rock and scrub, a town that had grown up around a silver mine that had played out years ago. Now it survived on cattle, stubbornness, and the unwillingness of its people to admit they were living somewhere that had already died. The chickens scattered as Mara approached, clucking their irritation. She scattered feed with mechanical efficiency, her mind already on the day ahead. The announcement had come 3 days ago, nailed to the post outside the general store. All unmarried women of marriageable age are required to attend the selection. Noon, town square, no exceptions, selection. Like they were cattle. Like they were goods to be inspected and purchased. Mara had read it twice, her stomach turning colder with each word. Bess wasn't old enough yet. She had another year, but Mara had just turned 22. There was no escaping it. "You thinking about it again?" Mara jumped. Her father stood at the edge of the chicken yard, his hat in his hands. He was a quiet man, worn down by years of hard work, and a wife who never let him forget his failures. "Hard not to," Mara said. He nodded slowly. "Your mother thinks—" "I know what mother thinks." The words came out sharper than she intended. "She thinks I'll embarrass the family. She thinks no one will choose me. She thinks I shouldn't even bother showing up." Her father's weathered face creased with something that might have been pain. "She worries." "She's ashamed." He didn't argue. That was answer enough. Mara finished with the chickens and brushed past him, heading toward the small vegetable garden that struggled in the rocky soil. Her hands needed work. Work kept her from thinking. Work kept her from feeling. But today, work wasn't enough. By mid-morning, the house was thick with tension. Her mother moved through the rooms like a storm cloud, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting, criticizing things that didn't matter. "Stand up straight. Don't slouch like that. For once, could you just try to look presentable?" Mara stood in the kitchen, hands clasped in front of her, while her mother circled like a predator. "Maybe if you smiled more. Maybe if you—" Her mother stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter. Just try not to make it worse than it has to be." "How could I possibly make it worse?" Her mother's eyes went cold. "By opening your mouth." The walk to town took 20 minutes. Mara went alone. Her mother had developed a sudden headache. Bess had chores. Her father had disappeared into the barn. No one wanted to watch. The town square was already filling with people when she arrived. Young women clustered in nervous groups, their dresses carefully pressed, their hair elaborately arranged. Mothers fussed over daughters. Fathers stood awkwardly to the side, unsure what to do with their hands. And then there was Mara. She took her place at the far end of the line, forming along the eastern edge of the square. No one stood next to her. No one acknowledged her presence except to move slightly away, as if whatever she had might be contagious. Clara Whitmore, 2 spots down, whispered something to her friend. They both looked at Mara and giggled. Heat crawled up Mara's neck, but she kept her eyes forward, straight ahead. Don't react. Don't give them more ammunition. The square filled. Men gathered on the opposite side. Some young, some not so young, all of them examining the women with varying degrees of interest or indifference. The whole thing felt obscene. A marketplace for human beings. Sheriff Dalton stood on the raised platform in the center of the square, his badge catching the noon sun. He was a big man, the kind who enjoyed his authority a little too much. "All right, settle down," his voice boomed across the square. "You all know why we're here. Blackridge needs families, needs stability, needs the next generation. So we're doing this the old way, the way that works." Mara's hands were shaking. She clasped them tighter. "Now," Dalton continued, "we got a special guest today. Man who's agreed to help us out, set an example for how this is done." He gestured to someone at the edge of the platform. "Caleb Rourke, come on up here." A ripple went through the crowd. Curiosity, speculation, interest. The man who climbed onto the platform wasn't what Mara expected. Caleb Rourke was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made people step back without meaning to. His face was weathered, marked with old scars, his eyes the color of winter storms. He moved like someone who'd seen things, survived things, and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He also looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Rourke here is new to our area," Dalton said, clapping a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Bought the old Hendricks Ranch up north, man of means, man of character, and he's agreed to participate in today's selection." Something in Dalton's tone suggested that agreed was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Caleb's eyes swept across the line of women, expression unreadable. Mara felt his gaze pass over her and kept her own eyes down. There was no point hoping. Hope only made the fall hurt worse. "So, Mr. Rourke," Dalton said, his voice carrying that false joviality that men in power used when they were enjoying themselves too much. "Take your pick. Any of these fine young ladies would be honored." "No." The single word cut through the square like a knife. Dalton blinked. "Excuse me?" I said no. Caleb's voice was quiet but absolute. "I didn't agree to this. Now, we had an arrangement. You had an arrangement. I needed a land deed processed. You said you'd help if I participated in community events." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a community event. This is human trafficking with legal paperwork." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Several men stepped forward, hands on their belts. The atmosphere shifted from celebratory to dangerous in seconds. Mara watched, frozen. This stranger was about to start something he couldn't finish. "You didn't challenge Sheriff Dalton. Not in Blackridge." Dalton's face darkened. "You calling me a criminal?" "I'm calling this what it is. We're trying to build something here. Trying to create families, build a future. By lining women up like horses at auction?" Caleb's voice rose slightly. "By forcing them to stand here and be judged? No one's forcing anyone." But Dalton's hand had moved to his gun. "These women are here of their own free will." "Are they?" Caleb looked at the line of women again. This time, Mara met his eyes for just a second. Something passed between them, recognition, maybe, acknowledgement that they were both trapped in something neither had chosen. Then she looked away. Dalton was furious now, his face red. "You want that deed processed, you'll make a choice. Right now. Or you can pack up and get out of my county." The threat hung in the air. Caleb could fight. Mara could see it in the way he held himself, the way his hands stayed loose and ready. But fighting meant losing everything he'd come here for. Fighting meant becoming an outcast. She knew that position well. Caleb's jaw worked, muscles tensing. His eyes swept the crowd again. All the people watching, waiting to see what he'd do. All the power structures he'd have to navigate if he stayed. All the compromises he'd have to make. Then his gaze landed on Mara again, and something shifted in his expression. "Fine," he said. "I'll choose." Dalton smiled, triumph oozing from every pore. "Now we're talking. Take your time. Look them over." Her! The word dropped like a stone into still water. Dalton frowned. What? Caleb pointed directly at Mara. Her, that one. I choose her. The square went silent. Then the laughter started. It began as scattered chuckles, then grew, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. People nudged each other, pointing. Someone made a joke Mara couldn't quite hear, and the laughter doubled. She stood frozen, her face burning, her entire body screaming at her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. Her legs had turned to stone. This was it, the worst moment of her life playing out in front of everyone she'd ever known. You can't be serious, Dalton said, but he was smiling now like this was the best entertainment he'd had in months. I'm serious. Look at her, man. Look at what else is available. Dalton gestured at the other women. You could have Clara Whitmore, prettiest girl in 3 counties. Or Sarah Jennings, comes from good stock. Or, I choose her, Caleb repeated. His voice hadn't changed, hadn't wavered. Is there a problem? Besides the obvious, someone in the crowd shouted. More laughter. Mara wanted to disappear, wanted the earth to open up and swallow her whole. This was worse than being rejected. This was being chosen as a joke, as a statement, as whatever point this stranger was trying to make. She finally found her voice. I don't want. Do you accept? Dalton was looking at her now, his eyes glittering with malice. Mr. Rourke has made his choice. Do you accept? The question was a trap. If she said no, she'd be refusing the only proposal she'd ever get, confirming everything everyone had ever said about her. If she said yes, she'd be binding herself to a man who'd chosen her for God knows what reason, certainly not for any reason that had to do with actually wanting her. Her throat closed up. Words wouldn't come. She accepts, Caleb said. Let her speak for herself. Dalton was enjoying this too much. Caleb turned to face Mara directly. For the first time, she got a clear look at his eyes. They weren't mocking, weren't laughing. They were steady, clear, maybe even kind. Do you accept? He asked, not demanding, asking. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but running would just prove them all right. Running would mean spending the rest of her life in her parents' house, growing old while her mother's disappointment calcified into resentment. At least this way, she'd be somewhere else. Yes, she whispered. I can't hear you, Dalton called. Yes! The word came out louder than she intended, almost angry. I accept. The laughter intensified. Someone started a slow clap. Others joined in, mocking applause filling the square. Well then, Dalton was beaming now. Let's make it official. Judge Morrison? An old man in a dusty black coat shuffled onto the platform, looking confused. We're doing this now? Here? No time like the present, Dalton said. What followed was the fastest, most humiliating wedding ceremony in Black Ridge history. Judge Morrison mumbled through the words, clearly uncomfortable. Caleb repeated his vows in a flat, emotionless tone. When it came time for Mara to speak, her voice shook so badly she had to say, I do, 3 times before anyone could understand her. There were no rings, no flowers, no celebration, just a piece of paper signed and witnessed that legally bound her to a complete stranger. You may kiss the bride, Morrison said weakly. The crowd hooted and hollered. Someone shouted something crude. Mara felt her stomach turn. Caleb leaned in, but instead of kissing her, he simply said very quietly, We don't have to do this part. She nodded, grateful and humiliated in equal measure. He straightened, turned to Dalton, and extended his hand. The deed? Dalton's smile was vicious. Right, about that. There's a processing fee for expedited service. Should have it ready for you in, 6 to 8 weeks. Caleb's hand dropped. You said, I said I'd help, and I am helping. Just takes time, you understand. The understanding passed between them clearly. Dalton had gotten exactly what he wanted. A show, a humiliation, a demonstration of his power, and Caleb had gotten nothing but a wife he didn't want and a promise that was already being broken. Come on, Caleb said to Mara. We're leaving. The walk through town was the longest of Mara's life. Every step felt like walking through fire. The whispers followed them, comment after comment, each one landing like a physical blow. Give it a week. He'll send her back. Poor bastard. Doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. At least someone took her off her family's hands. Mara kept her eyes straight ahead, her hands clenched so tightly her nails cut into her palms. Caleb walked beside her, not touching her, not speaking, just there. A solid presence in the storm. His horse, a big roan gelding, waited at the hitching post outside the general store. He untied it, then looked at Mara. "Can you ride?" "No." He nodded, unsurprised. "You'll have to ride with me then, just for today." He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then extended a hand down to her. Mara stared at it, acutely aware of everyone watching, of how she'd look trying to mount a horse, of how her weight would... "Take my hand," Caleb said. Not impatient, just matter of fact. She took it. His grip was strong, calloused from hard work. He pulled, she pushed, and somehow, clumsily, awkwardly, nearly kicking the horse in the process, she ended up behind him in the saddle. "Hold on," he said. She gripped the back of the saddle, trying to keep distance between them. "Around my waist," he clarified, "unless you want to fall off." Heat flooded her face, but she complied, her arms barely reaching around him. He was solid, unmovable. She felt his muscles shift as he guided the horse into motion. They rode out of Blackridge as the sun reached its peak. Mara didn't look back. The ride took over an hour. They traveled north, leaving the valley behind, climbing into rougher country where rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth and vegetation grew sparse and stubborn. Caleb didn't speak. Didn't try to make small talk or explain or comfort. He just rode, steady and certain, like he'd made the journey 1,000 times. Mara's mind raced. What had she done? What had he done? Why had he chosen her? The question burned in her throat, but she couldn't bring herself to ask it, couldn't bear to hear whatever answer he might give. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a structure appeared in the distance. The ranch house was small but solid, built from weathered wood and stone. A barn stood nearby, along with a few smaller outbuildings. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, lined with cottonwood trees that whispered in the wind. It was isolated, remote, miles from the nearest neighbor. No one would hear her scream. The thought came unbidden, and Mara hated herself for thinking it. But she didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted from her, didn't know if choosing her had been some kind of punishment for her or for himself or for Blackridge. Caleb dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs nearly gave out when she hit the ground. Her entire body ached from the unfamiliar position, muscles screaming from being tensed for so long. He led the horse to the barn, Mara following at a distance. Inside the barn was neat and organized. 2 other horses occupied stalls, a gray mare and a younger bay. They nickered at Caleb's entrance. He spoke to them softly as he unsaddled the roan, movements efficient and practiced. Mara stood in the doorway, unsure what to do with herself. Finally, the horse settled. Caleb turned to face her. They stared at each other across the barn. Now he would explain. Now he would tell her why. Now he would... "The house has 2 bedrooms," he said. "You can have the larger one. I'll take the smaller one in back." Mara blinked. "What?" "2 bedrooms," he repeated. "You'll want privacy." I don't understand." Caleb leaned against the stall door, studying her. "What don't you understand?" "Why you chose me. What you want from me. Why you..." Her voice cracked. "Why you did this." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You were standing at the end of the line, alone, while everyone else clustered together. So? So I knew exactly how that felt." Mara's throat tightened. "That's not... You can't just marry someone because you feel sorry for them. I didn't marry you because I felt sorry for you." His tone was mild, but there was steel underneath. "I married you because Dalton was going to ruin my life if I didn't choose someone. And you looked like you needed out of that town as badly as I needed that deed processed. So this is what? A business arrangement? If you want to call it that." "What do you call it?" He considered. 2 people helping each other survive. It wasn't what she'd expected. Wasn't romantic or comforting or any of the things the stories promised. But it was honest. And after a day full of lies and humiliation, honesty felt like water in the desert. "Okay," she said. "Okay? 2 people surviving. I can do that." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Good. Come on, I'll show you the house. The interior was sparse but clean. The main room served as kitchen and living area both, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A rough wooden table occupied the center of the space, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty. I haven't been here long, Caleb said, almost apologetically. Still getting settled. It's fine. He showed her the larger bedroom, barely furnished, just a bed and a chest of drawers, then the smaller one where he'd apparently been sleeping. A washroom connected to the main house, fed by the creek. Primitive, but functional. You hungry? He asked. She realized she hadn't eaten since early morning. Yes. I've got beans and salt pork, not fancy. I don't need fancy. They ate in silence, sitting at opposite ends of the table. The food was plain but filling. Caleb didn't try to make conversation, and Mara was grateful. Her mind was too full, her emotions too raw. After dinner, he showed her where things were stored: flour, coffee, dried goods, how the stove worked, where the well was. I'll teach you to ride tomorrow, he said. Can't live out here without knowing how. Tomorrow? Her body still ached from the single ride. Best to get back on the horse quick, otherwise fear sets in. She wanted to argue, but he was probably right. Okay. As the light faded, Caleb lit a few lanterns, casting warm pools of light through the house. You should get some rest, he said. It's been a long day. That was an understatement. Mara retreated to the larger bedroom, closing the door behind her. The room was simple but private, more private than she'd ever had in her parents' house, where she'd always shared with Bess. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the gray dress, and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning, she'd been in her mother's kitchen, dreading the day ahead. Now she was married to a stranger, living in a house miles from anywhere, bound to a man she didn't know for reasons she didn't fully understand. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt something else. Not quite relief. Not quite hope. But something in that direction. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Yes? Caleb's voice came through the wood. Just wanted to make sure you had everything you need. I'm fine. A pause. All right, I'll be in the other room if you need anything. His footsteps retreated. Mara lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, night sounds filled the air. Crickets, the wind in the cottonwoods, the distant call of some night bird. For the first time in her life, she was somewhere her mother couldn't criticize her. Somewhere the townspeople couldn't whisper about her. Somewhere she could just exist. It wasn't freedom, not exactly, but it was different. And different, right now, was enough. She closed her eyes and, despite everything, fell into the deepest sleep she'd had in years. Morning came early. Mara woke to the sound of movement in the main room, footsteps, the clatter of the stove being stoked, the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly in the same gray dress, it was all she had, and ventured out. Caleb was at the stove, cooking something in a large pan. He looked up when she entered. Coffee's ready, he said. She poured herself a cup, the warmth seeping into her hands. What are you making? Eggs. Chicken started laying again. He gestured to a basket on the counter containing half a dozen brown eggs. Meant to ask, you know how to cook? Yes? Good. I'm terrible at it. It was the first almost joke he'd made, and it startled a small smile out of her. They ate breakfast together, still not talking much, but the silence felt less strained than the night before. After, Caleb pushed back from the table. Ready for that riding lesson? Every muscle in her body protested. Do I have a choice? Not really. Outside, the morning was cool and bright. Caleb brought out the gray mare, a patient-looking animal with kind eyes. This is Smoke, he said. She's gentle. Good for learning. He showed Mara how to approach the horse, how to let her smell your hand, how to speak calmly. Smoke nuzzled her palm, whiskers tickling, and something in Mara's chest loosened slightly. Then came the hard part. Left foot in the stirrup, Caleb instructed. Then push up and swing your right leg over. Mara tried. Failed. Tried again. Failed again. On the third attempt, she nearly fell backward. Caleb caught her elbow, steadying her. It's harder than it looks, she said, breathing hard. Everything worth doing is. He adjusted the stirrup. One more time. I'll help. This time, with his hands guiding her, she made it into the saddle. The ground looked very far away. How do I... Just sit for now. Get used to the height. Smoke shifted slightly and Mara grabbed the pommel, heart racing. Easy, Caleb said. To her or the horse, she wasn't sure. Just breathe. She breathed. Slowly, her heart rate settled. The mare stood patiently, ears flicking. Good, Caleb said. Now I'm going to lead her around the yard. Don't try to steer yet. Just feel how she moves. He took the reins and began walking. Smoke followed, her gait smooth and even. Mara rocked gently in the saddle, trying to find the rhythm. At first it was terrifying, then awkward, then less awkward. They circled the yard 3 times before Caleb stopped. How do you feel? Like I'm going to fall off at any second. But you haven't. Not yet. That's progress. He helped her dismount, and her legs shook when she hit the ground. We'll practice every day, he said. In a week, you'll be riding on your own. She wanted to argue that a week wasn't nearly enough time. But something in his tone said it wasn't a suggestion. The days began to form a pattern. Mornings, riding lessons. Mara fell twice in the first 3 days, both times landing hard enough to knock the wind out of her. Both times, Caleb helped her up, checked for injuries, and put her right back in the saddle. The only way past fear is through it, he said. She was beginning to hate that phrase. Afternoons, work. There was always work. Mending fences, tending the vegetable garden Caleb had started but neglected, hauling water, feeding animals. The list never ended. Mara's hands blistered, then calloused. Her muscles ached in places she didn't know she had muscles. She went to bed exhausted every night and woke sore every morning. But something strange was happening. She was getting stronger, not just physically, though that too. Her arms could lift things now that would have been impossible a week ago. Her legs could carry her further without tiring. But it was more than that. She was getting comfortable here, in the silence, in the routine, in the space to just be. Caleb didn't hover. Didn't watch her constantly or critique her movements. He gave instructions when necessary, then left her to figure things out. When she made mistakes, and she made plenty, he'd show her the right way once, then move on. No judgment, no disappointment, no shame. It was utterly foreign to her. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after their arrival, they sat on the porch watching the sun set. It had become an accidental tradition, the only time they really stopped working. Can I ask you something? Mara said. Caleb nodded. Why did you really choose me? And don't say it was just because I was standing alone. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, my wife died 3 years ago. Mara's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Cholera, he continued, his voice flat, swept through our town, took her and our daughter both. Sarah was 5. I'm so sorry. After they died, everyone looked at me different, like I was broken, like I needed fixing. He stared at the horizon. They meant well, but it was suffocating. All the pity, all the suggestions about how I should grieve, how I should heal, how I should move on. So you left. So I left. Came out here looking for a place where no one knew me, where I could just exist, work the land, build something new. And then Dalton trapped you. And then Dalton trapped me. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. But when I saw you standing there, being looked at the way I'd been looked at, I recognized it. That feeling of being a problem everyone wants to solve or ignore. Mara's throat tightened. I'm not her. Your wife. I can't replace... I'm not asking you to. His tone was gentle but firm. I'm not looking for a replacement. I'm just looking for, I don't know, something different. They sat in silence as the sun disappeared behind the ridge. For what it's worth, Mara said quietly, thank you for getting me out of there. You don't need to thank me. I do. You didn't have to choose me. You could have picked anyone. So could you, he pointed out. You could have said no, could have refused, and gone back to my mother's house, to a lifetime of being reminded how unwanted I am. She shook her head. This is better. Is it? She considered. Yes. Even with the falling off horses and the blisters and the aching muscles, this is better. Something passed between them then. Not quite understanding, but maybe the beginning of it. The third week brought new challenges. A fence broke during a storm, letting 3 cattle wander off. Caleb and Mara spent an entire day tracking them down and herding them back. By the time they returned, both soaked and covered in mud, Mara was ready to collapse. But she'd done it, helped, been useful. That night, too tired to cook, they ate bread and cheese by the fire. "You did good today," Caleb said. It was such a simple statement. 4 words, but they hit Mara like a physical force. When was the last time someone had said she did good? Not good enough. Not adequate. Good. "Thank you," she managed. A few days later, Caleb announced they needed to go into town. Mara's stomach dropped. "Black Ridge?" "No. Ridge Creek, 20 miles east. Bigger town, better supplies. We need things I can't make or grow." Relief flooded through her. Not Black Ridge. Somewhere else, somewhere she wouldn't know anyone. But the relief was short-lived. "Can you handle a longer ride?" Caleb asked. "How long?" "Most of a day, there and back." Her body still protested the daily riding lessons, but she was getting better. Could mount Smoke on her own now. Could steer mostly. Could even trot without falling off, though galloping was still beyond her. "I can manage," she said, with more confidence than she felt. They left at dawn, both on horseback now. The ride was brutal. By noon, every part of Mara's body screamed for rest. But she gritted her teeth and kept going, determined not to slow Caleb down, determined not to be a burden. Ridge Creek was larger than Black Ridge, sprawling and busy. People filled the streets, miners, ranchers, families, drifters. No one gave them a second glance. The anonymity was intoxicating. Caleb handled the business, buying supplies, arranging for bulk goods to be delivered, settling accounts. Mara waited with the horses, watching the flow of humanity around her. A woman about her age passed by carrying a baby. She smiled at Mara in passing, not a mocking smile, not a pitying smile, just a smile. Mara smiled back, the expression feeling strange on her face. On the ride home, supplies tied to the horses, Caleb asked, "You okay? You've been quiet." "Just thinking." "About?" "How it feels to be invisible." "You're not invisible." "No, I mean..." She struggled to find the words. "In Black Ridge, everyone saw me, every second of every day, being watched, being judged. But in Ridge Creek, no one knew me. No one cared. I was just another person." "And that felt good?" "It felt like breathing." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know that feeling." They rode in companionable silence the rest of the way home. Home. When had she started thinking of the ranch as home? That night, as they prepared dinner together, a routine that had become natural, Caleb said, "I've been thinking." "About?" "Winter's coming in a few months. We'll need more supplies, more firewood. The roof on the barn needs repairs before the snow." "Okay." "I can't do it all alone." Mara looked up from the pot she was stirring. "I'll help. You know I will." "I know, but..." He hesitated. "I want to make sure you know this is your home too. Not just a place you're staying. You have a say in what we do, how we do it. This isn't me giving you orders. This is us, figuring it out together." The words settled over her like a blanket, warm, unexpected, almost uncomfortable in their kindness. "Okay," she said, "together." And for the first time since the wedding, it felt like maybe this strange arrangement might actually work. The first snow came in early November, just light flurries that melted by afternoon. Caleb stood at the barn door watching the sky, his expression unreadable. "It'll get worse," he said. "We've got maybe 2 weeks before the real storms hit." Mara had never experienced a hard winter. Black Ridge sat low in the valley where snow was rare and brief. But she'd heard stories about the northern ranges, about people trapped for weeks, about livestock freezing, about the silence that came when the world turned white. "What do we need to do?" she asked. Over the next 10 days, they worked harder than Mara thought possible, chopping firewood until her shoulders screamed, reinforcing the barn walls with extra boards, moving the cattle closer to the house where they could be fed more easily, stocking the root cellar with everything they might need. Caleb was relentless, pushing both of them from dawn until well past dark. But he never asked her to do anything he wasn't doing himself. When she struggled to lift a heavy beam, he was there. When her hands bled from the axe handle, he showed her how to wrap them properly. "You're tougher than you think," he said one evening as they stacked the last of the firewood. "I don't feel tough. I feel like I'm dying. That's how you know you're getting stronger." She wanted to argue, but her body was too exhausted to form words. The real snow arrived on a Tuesday morning, silent and total. Mara woke to an eerie quiet and looked out the window to find the world transformed. Everything was white, the ground, the roof, the trees. Snow was still falling, thick and heavy. Caleb was already up, feeding the stove. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough. We're not going anywhere for a while." The isolation she'd appreciated suddenly felt different, dangerous. They were miles from anyone, cut off completely. If something happened, an injury, an illness, a fire, there would be no help coming. Caleb must have seen the fear on her face. "We'll be fine," he said. "We prepared. We've got food, fuel, water from the creek. Just have to wait it out." The snow fell for 3 days straight. On the fourth morning, it finally stopped, leaving drifts as high as Mara's waist. The world was silent except for the occasional crack of ice-laden branches breaking under their own weight. They fell into a new rhythm. Morning chores took twice as long, breaking ice on the water troughs, digging paths to the barn, making sure the animals stayed warm and fed. Afternoons were spent inside, maintaining equipment, mending clothes, doing all the small tasks that had been pushed aside during the frantic preparation. And talking. Without the constant demands of outdoor work, they had time. Time to sit by the fire. Time to share meals that lasted more than 10 minutes. Time to actually have conversations instead of just exchanging necessary information. "Tell me about your family," Caleb said one evening. Mara stiffened. "Why?" "Because we're married and I barely know anything about you. There's not much to tell." "I doubt that." She stared into the fire, trying to decide how much to share, how much to trust him with. "My mother never wanted me," she said finally. "She had Bess first, perfect, pretty Bess. And I think she thought she was done. But then I came along, and I was wrong, too big, too awkward, too much." "Kids aren't wrong. Try telling her that." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "Everything I did was a disappointment. The way I looked, the way I moved, the way I existed. My father tried to defend me sometimes, but he's not strong enough to stand up to her, so I just learned to stay out of the way." "And the town?" "The town followed her lead. If my own mother thought I was worthless, why would anyone else think different?" She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "There was this one time, I was maybe 12. The school teacher organized a dance. All the kids were supposed to participate. I was so excited. I practiced the steps at home for weeks." "What happened?" "The day of the dance, I showed up in my best dress. And the teacher took one look at me and said I should help serve refreshments instead. Said it would be better that way, that I'd be more comfortable." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's cruel?" "Yeah, but also honest in a way. I couldn't dance like the other girls. Couldn't move like them. Would have just embarrassed myself." She shrugged, trying to make it seem like it didn't matter. "So I served refreshments and watched everyone else have fun. Did you ever try again, to dance?" "No, what would be the point?" He didn't answer, just stared into the fire with an expression she couldn't read. The next morning, Mara woke to the sound of furniture being moved. She emerged from her room to find Caleb pushing the table against the wall. "What are you doing?" "Clearing space." "For what?" He held out his hand. "For this." She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You want to dance? Now? Here?" "Why not?" "Because I don't know how. Because I'll look ridiculous. Because some teacher told you to serve refreshments 20 years ago." The words hit harder than they should have. 10 years. And yes. Well, that teacher was an idiot. He kept his hand extended. "Come on. No one's watching. No one's judging. Just you and me and a lot of snow outside." "There's no music." "Don't need music. Just need to move." Every instinct told her to refuse, to retreat to her room and pretend this conversation never happened. But something in his expression stopped her. A challenge, maybe. Or an invitation. Against her better judgment, she took his hand. His grip was warm and steady. He pulled her into the cleared space, positioning her carefully. "Put your hand here. he said, guiding her left hand to his shoulder. And I'll hold this one. I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I, really. Sarah, my wife, she tried to teach me once. I was terrible at it. A sad smile crossed his face. She said I danced like a bear with a limp. That's not encouraging. Just means we're well matched. He started to move, slow and simple. Just basic steps, nothing fancy. Mara tried to follow, immediately stepped on his foot. Sorry. You're fine. Try again. She did. Stepped on his foot again. Maybe this was a bad idea, she said. Maybe you're thinking too much. He adjusted his grip slightly. Stop trying to do it right. Just feel the movement and follow. That doesn't make any sense. Probably not, but try it anyway. She took a breath and tried to quiet her mind. Tried to stop anticipating the next step and just move. And somehow, it worked a little better. They weren't graceful. They weren't smooth. Caleb was right. He did move like a bear with a limp. And Mara was clumsy and uncertain, catching her feet on his, losing the rhythm constantly. But they kept going. Around and around the small cleared space, bumping into furniture, laughing when they collided, starting over when they got completely lost. At some point, Mara realized she was smiling. Actually smiling, not the tight, forced expression she usually wore, but something real. See, Caleb said, you can dance. This isn't dancing. This is controlled falling. Same thing. They continued until they were both winded, then collapsed into chairs, breathing hard. Thank you, Mara said, for stepping on your feet, for trying, for seeing me as someone who could do this, even badly. His expression grew serious. Mara, you need to understand something. The way those people treated you, your mother, that teacher, the whole damn town, that wasn't about you. That was about them, about their fear and their cruelty and their need to feel better by making someone else feel worse. Easy to say, but true anyway. He leaned forward. You are not what they told you. You never were. She wanted to believe him, wanted to so badly it hurt. But 22 years of being told otherwise was hard to overcome in a few weeks. The snow melted slightly, then froze again, creating a world of ice. Caleb tried to venture out to check on the far pasture, but his horse lost footing on the slick ground and threw him hard. He came back limping, his face pale. Let me see, Mara said. It's fine. You're limping. It's not fine. Reluctantly, he sat. She examined his leg carefully. No breaks, but badly bruised. She made a cold compress from snow wrapped in cloth and made him keep it elevated. You're bossy, he said. You're stubborn. We're both right. Over the next few days, their roles reversed. Mara took over the outdoor chores while Caleb's leg healed, pushing through drifts to reach the barn, breaking ice, feeding animals. It was exhausting work, made worse by the cold and her relative inexperience. But she did it. Every morning, every evening, without complaint. On the third day, Caleb watched her come in, covered in snow and shivering. You didn't have to do all that, he said. Yes, I did. Someone had to. I could have managed. No, you couldn't. Not with your leg like that. She pulled off her wet gloves. We're partners, remember? You said that. Partners help each other. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. Yeah, he said quietly. We do. The leg healed slowly. By the time Caleb could walk without limping, the worst of the winter had passed. The snow still fell occasionally, but less frequently, less heavily. One morning in late January, Mara was in the barn when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart jumped. No one came out here. No one knew they existed. She ran to the house. Caleb was already at the window, his expression grim. Who is it? She asked. Dalton. The sheriff rode into the yard on a big black horse, accompanied by two other men Mara didn't recognize. They looked official, dangerous. Caleb stepped onto the porch. Mara stayed in the doorway watching. Rourke, Dalton called out, not dismounting. Been a while. Not long enough? Now, that's not friendly. Dalton's smile was all teeth. I came all the way out here in this weather to check on you folks. Make sure you survived the winter. We're fine. You can leave. Oh, don't be like that. Thought you'd be happy to see me, especially since I brought this. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Your deed, all processed and legal. Caleb's eyes narrowed. About time. Well, these things take time. Bureaucracy, you know. Dalton made no move to hand over the paper. Of course, there's still that processing fee we discussed. You said 6 to 8 weeks. It's been 3 months. Winter slowed things down. Can't be helped. Dalton finally dismounted, swagger in every movement. But I'm a reasonable man. We can work something out. How much? Oh, not money. I was thinking more along the lines of community service. What kind of community service? Dalton's eyes slid to Mara, standing in the doorway. I'm organizing a town social next month. Spring celebration, you know. Thought you and the missus might want to attend. Show everyone how well you're doing. Mara's stomach turned to ice. He wanted to parade them around. Another spectacle. No, Caleb said flatly. No? Dalton's smile faded. Now that's not very neighborly. We're not neighbors, we're not part of your town, and we're not attending any social. See, that's where you're wrong. Dalton moved closer to the porch. You might live out here, but you're still in my county, still subject to my jurisdiction, and I say it would be in your best interest to make an appearance. Or what? Or maybe this deed processing takes another few months. Maybe there's some irregularities I need to investigate. Maybe that's extortion. That's politics. Dalton's eyes were cold now. You play nice, I play nice. You cause problems, I cause problems. Simple as that. The two men with Dalton shifted in their saddles, hands near their guns. The threat was clear. Caleb's jaw worked. Mara could see him calculating, weighing options. One social, he said finally. Then you leave us alone. Deal. Dalton tossed the deed onto the porch. March 15th. Don't be late. He remounted and rode off, his men following. They watched until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Caleb picked up the deed, unfolded it, examined it carefully. Is it real? Mara asked. Looks like it. But his voice was tight with anger. He's not done with us, though. He's the type who needs to prove he's in control. Needs to remind everyone who has the power. We don't have to go. Yes, we do. If we don't, he'll find other ways to make our lives difficult. Could challenge the deed. Could claim I didn't pay taxes. Could... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter. We go, we smile, we leave. That's the end of it. But Mara could hear the doubt in his voice. Neither of them believed it would be that simple. The weeks leading up to the social were tense. The weather improved enough for them to get back to regular work, but the looming date hung over everything like a storm cloud. Mara tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the daily tasks. But at night, lying in bed, her mind would race. What would they say? How would they look at her? Would it be like the wedding all over again, public humiliation dressed up as community? One evening, about a week before the social, she finally voiced her fears. What if they laugh again? Caleb looked up from the harness he was mending. They probably will. That's not comforting. Wasn't trying to be comforting, just honest. He set down the leather. Look, those people are going to think whatever they think. We can't control that. All we can control is how we respond. By standing there and taking it? By not letting it matter. Easy for you to say. You weren't the one standing at the end of that line. You weren't the one everyone laughed at. No. But I was the one who chose you anyway. His voice was gentle. And I'd do it again. So let them laugh. Let them whisper. Doesn't change the fact that we're still here, still standing, still making this work. Is it? Working? The question hung between them. Yeah, Caleb said after a moment. I think it is. And despite everything, Mara thought maybe he was right. The morning of March 15th arrived cold and clear. Mara dressed in the only decent dress she owned, a blue one she'd made herself over the winter, using fabric Caleb had bought on their trip to Ridge Creek. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and fitted her properly. She looked at herself in the small mirror. Same face, same body. But something was different. She stood straighter now, moved with more confidence. The months of hard work had changed her, not in the way her mother had always wanted, but in ways that actually mattered. She was stronger, capable, useful, not worthless. Caleb was waiting by the horses, dressed in his cleanest shirt and jacket. He looked uncomfortable, like a man preparing for battle rather than a social. Ready? He asked. No. But let's go anyway. The ride to Black Ridge took most of the morning. As they got closer, Mara's anxiety grew. Every familiar landmark brought back memories she'd rather forget. They arrived just before noon. The town square was already filling with people, tables set up with food, a makeshift stage for music, children running around screaming. All conversation stopped when Caleb and Mara rode in. Every eye turned to them. The whispers started immediately. Can't believe they actually came. Look at her, still fat as ever. Wonder if he's regretting it yet. Mara's face burned, but she kept her chin up. She'd survived 3 months of brutal winter. She could survive this. They dismounted. Caleb offered his arm. She took it, grateful for the anchor. Sheriff Dalton appeared almost immediately, all false warmth. "Rourke, Mrs. Rourke, so glad you could make it." He looked Mara up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. My, ranch life agrees with you. You look well." The pause before "well" was deliberate. Mara heard the unspoken insult. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said, voice level. Come, let me introduce you around. Lots of folks are curious about how you're settling in." He led them through the crowd like prizes on display. At every stop, the same pattern. False pleasantries, thinly veiled mockery, questions designed to embarrass. "So Caleb, you managing out there all alone? Must be hard work for just one person." The implication being that Mara wasn't pulling her weight. "We both work," Caleb said. "Mara handles as much as I do." Disbelief in every face, every oshaton. At another group, "Mrs. Rourke, you must get terribly lonely out there. No other women to talk to, no society. Don't you miss civilization?" "I miss very little about Blackridge," Mara said. Sharp intakes of breath. Dalton's smile tightened. They moved on, and on, and on, each interaction chipping away at Mara's composure. She could feel herself shrinking, retreating into old patterns. Shoulders hunching, eyes dropping, voice getting smaller. Then they reached her mother. Elizabeth Quinn stood with a group of women, all dressed in their finest. When she saw Mara approaching, her expression went cold. "Mother," Mara said. "Mara." Not a greeting, just acknowledgement. "How's Bess?" "Fine. She's been courted by the Morrison boy. Proper courtship, not whatever this was." The other women tittered. Caleb's arm tensed under Mara's hand, but he stayed silent. "I'm glad she's doing well," Mara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Are you?" Elizabeth's eyes were sharp. "Or are you just relieved you're not there to be compared to her anymore?" The words hit like a slap, all the old wounds tearing open. "That's enough," Caleb said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I said that's enough." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. "You can insult me all you want, but you're done insulting my wife." Elizabeth's face flushed. "How dare you? How dare I what? Stand up for her? Funny how you never did that, her own mother, and you treated her like something to be ashamed of." The women around Elizabeth gasped. This wasn't done. You didn't call out a mother. You didn't air family business. "You don't know anything about raising children," Elizabeth hissed. "I know you don't do it by telling them they're worthless." Caleb's eyes were ice. "Come on, Mara. We're done here." He tried to steer her away, but Mara didn't move. Something was building inside her, something that had been compressed for so long it had turned to diamond. "No," she said. Caleb looked at her in surprise. "No?" "No, I'm not running away this time." She turned to face her mother fully. "You made me believe I was broken, that something was wrong with me, that I was too big, too clumsy, too much. And I believed you. For years I believed you." "Mara, don't make a scene." "Why not? You've been making scenes about me my whole life. Just quieter, more polite, but just as cruel." Her voice was shaking, but she kept going. "I worked myself sick trying to be what you wanted, trying to be smaller, quieter, less. And it was never enough, because the problem was never me. It was you." Elizabeth's mouth opened and closed. The women around her looked scandalized. "You couldn't love me as I was," Mara continued, "so you tried to make me into something else. And when that didn't work, you just gave up on me, made me the family embarrassment, the daughter you hid away." "I did my best. Your best was terrible." The words came out flat, final. "And I'm done pretending it wasn't." She turned and walked away, Caleb falling into step beside her. Behind them, the silence was absolute. They made it halfway across the square before Dalton blocked their path. Leaving so soon, the festivities haven't even started. We came. We were seen. We're leaving. Caleb's voice was tight. Now that's not very sporting, especially after that little display. Dalton's eyes gleamed. Got quite a mouth on her, don't she? Move. Or what? You'll make me? Dalton stepped closer. You don't give orders here, Rourke. I do. And I say you stay. The crowd was gathering, sensing confrontation. This was what they'd come for. Entertainment, drama, someone to look down on. Mara felt Caleb's muscles coil, ready to fight. But fighting would give Dalton exactly what he wanted, an excuse to arrest them, to take the ranch, to destroy what they'd built. She put her hand on Caleb's arm. Wait, she said quietly. Then louder to Dalton, you want us to stay? Fine, we'll stay, but not for you. She walked to the center of the square where the music stage stood empty, climbed the 3 steps onto the platform. Every eye turned to her. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. But she'd started this. She had to finish it. You all wanted a show, she said, her voice carrying across the square. So here's your show. She looked directly at Caleb, extended her hand. His eyes widened slightly. Then understanding dawned. He crossed to the platform and took her hand. What are you doing? He murmured. What you taught me. Dancing anyway. A man near the stage had a fiddle. Play something, Mara called to him. He looked confused. Ma'am, I don't... Just play. Hesitantly, uncertainly, he lifted the fiddle, started a simple tune, tentative and slow. Mara pulled Caleb into position. The same position they'd practiced in their small house, bumping into furniture, laughing at their mistakes. We're going to look ridiculous, Caleb said. I know, but we're going to do it anyway. They started to move. It wasn't graceful, wasn't polished. Mara still stepped on his feet. Caleb still moved like a bear with a limp. They were off rhythm, awkward, clearly inexperienced, but they kept going, around and around the small stage, holding on to each other, finding their own rhythm even if it didn't quite match the music. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Then someone laughed. Then another. But the laughter sounded different this time. Not mocking, uncertain, like they didn't quite know what they were seeing. The fiddle player, finding his confidence, played stronger, faster. Mara and Caleb struggled to keep up, nearly colliding, recovering, continuing. And something strange happened. A few people started clapping. Not many. Not most, but a few. An old woman Mara didn't recognize nodded approvingly. A young couple smiled at each other. Even some of the men who'd been sneering looked grudgingly impressed. Because what Mara and Caleb lacked in skill, they made up for in determination. In the sheer audacity of doing this thing they were terrible at, in front of everyone who'd told them they couldn't. The song ended. Mara and Caleb stood on the platform, breathing hard, still holding each other. The applause was scattered, uncertain, but it was there. Dalton's face was twisted with frustration. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to be humiliated, broken, put back in their place. Instead, they'd claimed their own space. Caleb helped Mara down from the platform. They walked toward their horses, the crowd parting. As they passed Elizabeth Quinn, Mara stopped. Her mother's face was pale, lips pressed thin. Goodbye, Mother, Mara said. Not angry, not pleading, just done. They mounted their horses and rode out of Black Ridge as the sun began its descent. Neither looked back. They rode in silence for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and Black Ridge. The sun hung low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that neither of them noticed. Mara kept her eyes on the horizon, her hands gripping the reins so tightly her knuckles had gone white. When they finally stopped to rest the horses near a creek, Caleb was the first to speak. You all right? Mara dismounted, her legs shaky. I don't know. That was brave. What you did back there. That was stupid. I just made everything worse. How do you figure? She turned to face him, and he could see tears tracking down her cheeks, though her voice stayed steady. I stood up there and made a fool of myself in front of everyone, proved exactly what they always thought, that I'm too much, too loud, too... Stop! Caleb crossed to her in 3 steps. You didn't prove anything except that you're done letting them define you. That's not foolish. That's freedom. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like I just burned the only bridge I had left. To what? A mother who never loved you? A town that treated you like dirt? His voice softened. Mara, those weren't bridges. They were chains. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the triumph she should feel. Instead, she just felt hollow, exhausted, like she'd spent everything she had on that one act of defiance and now there was nothing left. Come on, Caleb said gently. Let's get home before dark. Home. The word still felt strange in her mouth, but less strange than it used to. They arrived at the ranch after nightfall, both too tired to do more than tend the horses and collapse inside. Mara went straight to her room without eating, shut the door, and lay on the bed fully clothed. She didn't cry. Couldn't cry. Just stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of the day, examining each word she'd said to her mother like picking at a wound. Had she been too harsh? Too cruel? But then she remembered every insult, every criticism, every moment of being made to feel less than human, and the doubt faded. Maybe she had been harsh, but she'd also been honest. And honesty, she was learning, was its own kind of courage. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of dreams she couldn't quite remember when she woke. The next few days passed in a fog. Mara went through the motions of daily work, but her mind was elsewhere. Caleb gave her space, seemed to understand she needed time to process everything that had happened. On the fourth morning, she was mucking out the barn when she heard a horse approaching. Her stomach dropped. Not again. Not more trouble from Dalton or someone else from Blackridge coming to tell her what a disgrace she was. But when she emerged from the barn, the rider wasn't anyone from Blackridge. It was a woman, maybe 40 years old, sitting straight in the saddle despite clearly being exhausted from a long ride. She had graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and clothes that had seen hard use. "Help you?" Mara called out, wiping her hands on her apron. The woman dismounted stiffly. "I'm looking for Mara Rourke." "That's me. My name's Helen Cartwright. I own a ranch about 30 miles east of here. Heard about what happened in Blackridge." Mara's defenses went up immediately. "And you rode 30 miles to tell me what? That I was out of line? That I should apologize?" Helen's weathered face creased into a smile. "Hell no. I rode 30 miles to tell you it's about damn time someone told Elizabeth Quinn what a miserable cow she is." The shock of it, the casual profanity, the blunt honesty startled a laugh out of Mara. Actual laughter, the first in days. "Come inside," Mara said. "You look like you could use coffee." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Helen explained. She'd been in Blackridge selling cattle when the social happened, had witnessed the whole thing from the edge of the crowd. "I knew your mother, years back," Helen said. "Never liked her. Always putting on airs, always judging. And the way she talked about you," she shook her head, "made my blood boil. So when I saw you stand up to her, saw you get on that stage and dance like you didn't give a damn what anyone thought," she raised her coffee cup in salute. "Wanted to shake your hand. I gave plenty of damns," Mara admitted. "I was terrified. Courage isn't not being scared, it's being scared and doing it anyway." Helen set down her cup. "Look, I didn't just come here to pat you on the back. I came to offer you something." "What?" "There's a group of us. Ranch women, farmers' wives, widows running their own spreads. We meet once a month in Ridge Creek, share information, help each other out, trade goods. Could use someone like you." Mara blinked. "Someone like me? Someone who's not afraid to work, who pulls her weight, who doesn't take crap from anyone." Helen's eyes were kind. "I know what it's like to be the outsider. When my husband died, half the county thought I should sell the ranch and move to town, become some man's housekeeper or remarry quickly. I told them all to go to hell and ran the place myself. Been doing it for 8 years now." "You run a whole ranch? Alone?" "Got 2 hired hands, but yeah, mostly me. It's hard work, but it's mine. Nobody tells me what to do or who to be." She leaned forward. "Point is, you don't have to be isolated out here. There's women who understand, who've been where you are. And we look out for each other." The offer hung in the air. Mara had spent so long being alone, being rejected, that the idea of a community, a real one, built on mutual respect rather than obligation, felt foreign. "Why would you want me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. And besides, any woman who can make Elizabeth Quinn's face turn that particular shade of purple is worth knowing. Mara found herself smiling. When's the next meeting? Week from Thursday, Ridge Creek at the general store's back room, 2 o'clock. Helen stood. Think about it. No pressure, but we'd be glad to have you. After Helen left, Mara sat at the table for a long time, thinking. When Caleb came in for lunch, she told him about the visit. What do you think? She asked. I think you should go. Just like that? Just like that. He pulled bread and cheese from the cupboard. You've been cooped up out here with just me for company. That's enough to drive anyone crazy. I don't mind it here. Neither do I. But that doesn't mean you can't have more. Have connections, friends, a life beyond this ranch. He met her eyes. I don't want you to feel trapped here, Mara. This arrangement was supposed to help you, not cage you. Something warm bloomed in her chest. He was giving her permission to leave, to have a life separate from him. Not because he wanted her gone, but because he wanted her happy. Thank you, she said quietly. Nothing to thank me for. But there was. There really was. The week passed quickly. Mara found herself looking forward to Thursday with a nervousness that felt different from the dread before the Blackridge social. This was anticipation. Hope, even. She rode to Ridge Creek alone, Caleb staying behind to work on the barn roof. The journey that had seemed so daunting months ago now felt manageable. She knew the route, knew how to handle smoke, knew how to read the weather and pace herself. The general store was easy to find. Mara tied Smoke out front and made her way around to the back entrance, her heart hammering. Inside the back room, 6 women sat around a large table covered with papers, supplies, and coffee cups. They looked up when Mara entered, and for a moment the old fear rose up. They were all looking at her, judging her. Then Helen stood, smiling wide. Ladies, this is Mara Rourke. Mara, this is everyone. The introductions blurred together at first. Sarah, who ran a sheep farm. May, whose husband had a logging operation. Ruth, a widow like Helen with 3 kids and a grain farm. Catherine, young and newly married. Alice, older and sharp-eyed. They made room at the table without fuss, poured Mara coffee, asked simple questions about her ranch, about how the winter had been, about Caleb. No one mentioned Blackridge. No one mentioned her mother. No one looked at her with pity or judgment or barely concealed disdain. They just talked about crops and cattle prices, about a new irrigation technique May had tried, about Ruth's ongoing battle with a family of foxes raiding her henhouse. It was the most normal conversation Mara had experienced in her entire life. So here's the real reason we meet, Helen said after about an hour. We pool resources, share labor when someone needs extra hands, trade goods, support each other when times are tough. Like a cooperative? Mara asked. Exactly like that. Sarah's got a breeding ram we all share. May gets us lumber at cost. Ruth processes grain for anyone who needs it. We help each other because out here we have to. What would I contribute? I don't have anything special to offer. Alice spoke up for the first time, her voice raspy from years of tobacco. Helen says you can work. That's special enough. Most women I know are useless with a pitchfork. I'm not that good, but you try. That's the difference. May leaned forward. Look, we're not asking you to be perfect. We're asking you to be part of something. Show up. Help when you can. Take help when you need it. Simple as that. It was simple. Almost too simple. Mara kept waiting for the catch, the moment when they'd reveal what they really wanted from her. But the moment never came. Over the next few months, the meetings became a regular part of Mara's life. Once a month, she'd ride to Ridge Creek, spend the afternoon with the women, and ride home with her head full of new ideas and her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. They taught her things. Catherine showed her a better way to preserve vegetables. Ruth explained how to read weather patterns. Sarah gave her advice on dealing with difficult animals, and in return, Mara offered what she could. She was strong, good with her hands, willing to work. When May needed help moving timber, Mara was there. When Helen's hired hand broke his arm, Mara spent 3 days helping with the heavy work. She was becoming part of something, a community built on respect and mutual support rather than judgment and hierarchy. But more than that, she was building friendships, real ones. One evening in May, Ruth invited her to stay for dinner after a meeting. They sat on Ruth's porch watching her 3 kids play in the yard, 2 boys and a girl, ranging from 6 to 12. They're good kids, Ruth said. Wild as hell, but good. They look happy. They are. Wasn't always that way. When Thomas died, they were lost, scared. Thought we'd lose the farm, lose our home. Ruth took a sip of water. But we didn't. We fought. We worked. And we made it. Wasn't that terrifying, being alone with 3 kids to feed? Terrifying doesn't begin to cover it. But you know what I learned? Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. The trick is not letting the fear make your decisions. Mara thought about that as she rode home in the gathering dark. All her life, fear had dictated her choices. Fear of her mother's disapproval. Fear of the town's judgment. Fear of being too much or not enough. But lately, she'd been making choices despite the fear. Going to the meetings, standing up to her mother, dancing in the town square. And she was still here, still standing, maybe even thriving. Back at the ranch, Caleb was sitting on the porch, whittling something in the lamplight. "Good meeting?" he asked. "Really good. Ruth invited me to dinner." "You make friends with her?" "I think so. Is that strange, making friends at my age?" "Why would that be strange?" "I've never really had friends before. Not real ones." Caleb set down his whittling. "Most people don't have real friends. They have people they know, people they tolerate, people who serve a purpose. Real friendship is rare." "Did you have friends before?" "A few. Lost touch with most of them after Sarah and my daughter died. Hard to maintain friendships when you can't stand to be around anyone." It was the most he'd ever said about his past life. Mara sensed an opening, a chance to understand him better. What was she like? Sarah? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was loud, laughed at everything, drove me crazy half the time because she'd start projects and never finish them. We'd have half-painted walls and half-built furniture all over the house. A smile ghosted across his face at the memory. She sounds wonderful. She was, and exhausting, and frustrating, and perfect in all her imperfections. His voice roughened. "And I miss her every single day." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I had 5 good years with her. Some people don't even get that." He picked up the wood again, examining it. "But that's the thing about loss. It doesn't erase what you had. Doesn't make it not worth it." Mara understood what he was really saying. That loving someone, losing them, surviving it, that was its own kind of strength. They sat in companionable silence as night deepened around them. Summer arrived with brutal heat. The work intensified, irrigating the garden, maintaining the water sources, making sure the animals didn't overheat. Mara and Caleb fell into a rhythm, each knowing what needed to be done without much discussion. One afternoon, while Mara was working in the garden, she heard shouting from the direction of the north pasture. She dropped her tools and ran. Caleb was at the fence line, facing off with 2 men on horseback. Even from a distance, Mara could see the tension in his posture. She approached carefully. "Don't care what Dalton says," one of the men was saying. "This section belongs to the county grazing land." "The hell it does," Caleb shot back. "I've got the deed. This is my property." "Deeds can be wrong, or sheriffs can be liars." The second man's hand went to his gun. "Careful how you talk." Mara stepped up beside Caleb. "What's going on?" "These gentlemen are claiming our north pasture belongs to the county. They want us to move our cattle." "On whose authority?" "Sheriff Dalton's." The first man smiled. "Says there was a surveying error. This land's not part of your ranch." "That's convenient," Mara said, "right when our cattle are using it." "Convenient or not, it's the law. You got 3 days to move them." They rode off before either Mara or Caleb could respond. That evening, Caleb studied the deed by lamplight, comparing it to the rough map he'd drawn of the property. "It's our land," he said. "I'm sure of it. The creek's the boundary, and the creek runs east of that pasture. But if Dalton says otherwise, then Dalton's lying. Question is, why?" Mara thought about it. "He wants to force you out. He's been trying since the beginning. First the delayed deed, then forcing us to the social. Now this." "But why? What does he gain?" "Control. You challenged him, made him look weak in front of the town. Men like that don't forget." Caleb's jaw tightened. "So what do we do?" "We fight." "How? He's the law. We're nobody." "We're not nobody. Not anymore." Mara stood. "I'll talk to Helen. She's dealt with land disputes before, and May's husband knows people in the territorial office." We don't have to fight this alone. The next day, Mara rode to Helen's ranch. She explained the situation, showed her the deed, described what Dalton's men had said. Helen listened carefully, her expression growing darker. "That son of a bitch," she said finally. "Excuse my language, but that's what he is. He did the same thing to the Hendersons 3 years back, claimed part of their land for unpaid taxes, forced them to sell. What happened? They moved to California, gave up." Helen stood abruptly. "But you're not going to. Come on, we're calling an emergency meeting." By evening, all the women from the group had gathered at Helen's ranch. Mara explained the situation again, spread the deed on the table. Sarah studied it closely. "The creek's your boundary, that's clear as day." "But if Dalton claims otherwise," Catherine asked, "then he's committing fraud." May's voice was hard. "My husband's dealt with the territorial office before. They don't take kindly to sheriffs manipulating land records." "So we report him?" Mara asked. "We do better than that." Helen pulled out paper and pen. "We document everything. Get sworn statements from everyone who knows that land belongs to you. Create a paper trail so thick even Dalton can't talk his way out of it." Over the next 2 days, the women mobilized like a military operation. They visited neighbors, collected statements, found old survey records. May's husband contacted the territorial office. Ruth wrote to a lawyer she knew in the capital. Mara watched in amazement as these women, her friends, fought for her and Caleb with the same ferocity they'd fight for themselves. "Why are you doing this?" she asked Helen late one night. "Because it's right. And because if we don't stand up to bullies like Dalton, who will?" Helen's eyes were fierce. "Besides, you're one of us now. We protect our own." The words settled over Mara like a blanket. One of us. She belonged somewhere. For the first time in her life, she truly belonged. On the 3rd day, the deadline Dalton's men had given, Caleb and Mara stood at the north pasture fence, waiting. The men arrived right on schedule, but this time they had Dalton with them. "Time's up, Rourke," Dalton called out. "Move your cattle or we'll move them for you." "Touch one animal and you'll regret it," Caleb said. "That a threat?" "That's a promise," Dalton smiled. "Big words for someone who's about to lose everything. See, I've been patient with you, gave you chances. But you keep pushing, keep making trouble. So now you're going to leave," Helen said, riding up from behind them. Behind her came Sarah, May, Ruth, Catherine, and Alice. And behind them their husbands, their hired hands, their sons. Nearly 20 people, all armed, all serious. Dalton's smile faded. "This doesn't concern you, Helen." "Like hell it doesn't. This is fraud, Dalton. We've documented it. Filed complaints with the territorial office. Got sworn statements from 15 witnesses confirming this land belongs to the Rourkes. You can't." "Already did. And if you don't turn around and right away right now, we're going to make sure everyone in this county knows exactly what kind of sheriff they have." The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. Finally, Dalton jerked his horse's head around. "This isn't over." "Yeah," Helen called after him. "It is." They watched him ride away, his men following. When they were out of sight, Mara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Helen turned to her, grinning. "Told you we protect our own." Mara couldn't speak, could barely breathe. These people, these friends, had stood with her, had fought for her, had risked Dalton's wrath to defend her and Caleb. "Thank you," she finally managed. "Thank you all." "Nothing to thank us for," May said. "This is what neighbors do." But it was more than that, and everyone knew it. That evening, after everyone had left, Mara and Caleb sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I couldn't have done that alone," Caleb said quietly. "Would have lost everything." "You're not alone. Neither of us are." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You've changed since we got married." "Is that bad?" "No, it's incredible." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "You've become exactly who you were meant to be." Mara thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, scared, shrinking, convinced of her own worthlessness. She thought about who she was now, stronger, braver, part of a community, capable of standing up to sheriffs and mothers and her own crippling fear. "I think maybe you're right," she said. They sat in silence, comfortable with each other in a way that went beyond words. The arrangement that had started as mutual survival had become something else, something neither of them had expected. Not quite love. Not yet. But definitely friendship, partnership, mutual respect. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The victory over Dalton should have brought peace, but instead it brought tension of a different kind. Summer deepened into August, and with it came a strange new awareness between Mara and Caleb. They'd been living together for nearly 8 months now, working side by side, eating meals across from each other, existing in the same small space. But something had shifted after the standoff. Some invisible line that had kept them at a careful distance was beginning to blur. Mara noticed it first in small things. The way Caleb's hand would linger on hers when he helped her down from a horse. How his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way conversation at dinner had started lasting longer, stretching into the evening hours as they talked about everything and nothing. She didn't know what to make of it. Didn't know if she was imagining things or if he felt it too, this pull. This wanting something more than the arrangement they'd agreed to. One evening, she was washing dishes when he came up behind her to set down his plate. Their arms brushed, and she felt the contact like electricity. "Sorry," he said, stepping back quickly. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Her heart was racing and her hands were shaking, and she didn't understand what was happening to her. She finished the dishes in silence, acutely aware of him sitting at the table behind her, the scratch of his pen on paper as he worked through the ranch accounts. When she finally turned around, he was watching her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just—" He set down the pen. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you happy here?" The question caught her off guard. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one. Are you happy? Or are you just surviving?" Mara dried her hands on her apron, thinking, "I don't know if I've ever been happy. Not the way other people talk about it, but I'm content. I feel useful. I feel like I matter." "You do matter. I mean to myself. For the first time, I feel like I matter to myself." She met his eyes. "Why are you asking?" He stood, crossed to the window, stared out at the dark. "Because I don't want you to feel trapped. Don't want you to think this arrangement is all you can have." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if you wanted to leave, I wouldn't stop you. If you wanted to annul the marriage, find someone who actually chose you for the right reasons. You did choose me for the right reasons." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You chose me because we both needed a way out. Because we understood each other. That's more honest than most marriages start with." "Maybe. But it's not—" He trailed off. "Not what?" "Not what you deserve." The statement hung between them, heavy with implications neither seemed ready to explore. "And what do I deserve?" Mara asked quietly. He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. More than a man still in love with his dead wife. There it was. The truth laid bare. He was still grieving Sarah, still holding on to a love that death had ended but not erased. And Mara was what? A replacement? A consolation prize? A convenient arrangement? "I see," she said, keeping her voice level even as something cracked inside her chest. "No, you don't. That's not—" He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I'm not explaining this right." "You're explaining it fine. You still love Sarah. I'm not her. I never will be." "I understand." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head. "I don't know. Forget I said anything." He walked out, leaving Mara standing in the kitchen with tears burning behind her eyes and a knot in her throat she couldn't swallow past. She'd been foolish. Foolish to think that what was growing between them was real, that it meant something beyond practicality and convenience. He'd married her out of necessity, nothing more. And she needed to remember that. The next few days were strained. They spoke only when necessary, worked in parallel rather than together, ate meals in silence. The easy companionship they'd built over months dissolved into awkwardness and hurt feelings neither acknowledged. Mara threw herself into work, staying busy from dawn until she collapsed into bed exhausted. Anything to avoid thinking about the conversation, about Caleb's words, about the loneliness that had crept back into her bones. On the 4th day, Helen showed up unannounced. "You look terrible," she said bluntly when Mara answered the door. "Thanks. What happened?" Nothing happened. Helen pushed past her into the house, took one look around and snorted. "Right, nothing happened. That's why you've got shadows under your eyes and you're moving around like someone died." I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. Helen sat at the table, making it clear she wasn't leaving until she got answers. Talk. So Mara talked. Not everything, but enough. About the conversation with Caleb, about his admission that he was still in love with Sarah, about the stupid hope she'd been harboring that maybe this arrangement could become something real. Helen listened without interrupting. When Mara finally ran out of words, she said, "You love him." "What? No, I don't." "You love him. That's why this hurts so much." Mara wanted to deny it, wanted to say it was just disappointment or wounded pride or anything other than love. But the word had already settled over her like a truth she couldn't escape. She did love him, had maybe been falling in love with him for months without realizing it, loved his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, the way he saw her as capable when everyone else had seen her as broken. "It doesn't matter," she said. "He doesn't feel the same." "Did he say that?" "He said he's still in love with his dead wife." "That's not the same thing as not having feelings for you." Helen leaned forward. "Men are idiots about their emotions, Mara. They don't know how to process complicated feelings. He probably doesn't even know what he feels beyond guilt and confusion." "So what am I supposed to do?" "Talk to him. Actually talk, not whatever dancing around the subject you two have been doing. What if he doesn't want me? What if I'm just convenient? Then at least you'll know. At least you won't spend the rest of your life wondering." Helen's voice softened. "You've gotten brave about everything else. Time to get brave about this too." After Helen left, Mara sat on the porch watching the sun set. Caleb was in the barn, had been avoiding the house as much as she'd been avoiding him. She could see lamplight through the cracks in the wood, his shadow moving back and forth. She could go to him, could have the conversation Helen suggested, could lay her heart bare and risk the rejection that would surely follow. Or she could leave it alone, keep the fragile peace they'd built, accept that this arrangement was all it would ever be, and learn to live with that. The safe choice was obvious, but Mara was tired of safe. She stood, crossed the yard, pushed open the barn door. Caleb looked up from the saddle he was mending, surprise crossing his face. "Hey, we need to talk." Mara, "No, let me say this before I lose my nerve." She took a breath. "You said I deserve more than a man still in love with his dead wife. And maybe you're right, but I get to decide what I deserve, not you." He set down the saddle slowly. "Okay. I'm not Sarah, I know that. I'll never be her, and I'm not trying to be, but I'm me. And I'm here. And I'm—" Her voice wavered, but she pushed through. "I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Mara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Caleb stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Say something," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." The rejection she'd been expecting still hurt. "Right, of course. I shouldn't have—" "I loved Sarah," he said, cutting her off. "Loved her with everything I had. And when she died, I thought that was it. Thought I'd never feel anything again except this hollow ache where she used to be." Mara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "But then you came into my life. This woman I married out of spite and desperation. This woman who was supposed to be temporary, convenient, a means to an end." He stepped closer. "And you weren't. You were stubborn and brave, and you got stronger every single day. And somewhere along the way, I stopped just seeing an arrangement. I started seeing you." Hope flickered in Mara's chest, dangerous and fragile. "I'm terrified," Caleb continued. "Terrified of loving someone again and losing them. Terrified of betraying Sarah's memory. Terrified that what I feel for you somehow diminishes what I felt for her." "Does it?" Mara asked quietly. "No, that's what I'm finally realizing. Love isn't finite. Loving you doesn't mean I loved her less. It just means I'm capable of loving more than once." He was close enough now that she could see the emotions warring in his eyes. "I'm not still in love with Sarah. I'm still grieving her. There's a difference." "And me?" "You. I'm falling in love with. Have been for months, just been too scared and guilty to admit it." The tears Mara had been holding back finally spilled over. "You mean it?" "Every word." He reached out, hesitated, then gently brushed the tears from her cheeks. "I love you, Mara. Not as a replacement or a second choice, just you." She didn't think. Just closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was clumsy and desperate and perfect. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, into the warmth and solidity and rightness of being held by someone who actually wanted to hold her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We're doing this wrong," he said. "What do you mean? We're already married. We're supposed to fall in love before the wedding, not 8 months after." She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "When have we ever done anything the right way?" Fair point. They stood there in the lamplight barn, holding each other, and Mara felt something she'd never expected to feel. Complete. Whole. Like all the broken pieces of her life had finally found a way to fit together. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we stop sleeping in separate rooms like idiots." Heat flooded her face. "Caleb, unless you're not ready, I don't want to push." "I'm ready. I've been ready. Just didn't think you wanted—" He kissed her again, cutting off her rambling. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. "I want. Believe me, I want." They made their way to the house hand in hand, both nervous and excited and terrified. At the door to Mara's room, no, their room now, Caleb paused. "You sure about this?" "More sure than I've been about anything." What followed was awkward and sweet and utterly human. They fumbled with buttons and laces, laughed at their own nervousness, took their time learning each other. Mara had expected to feel self-conscious about her body, about all the things she'd been taught were wrong with it. But the way Caleb touched her, looked at her, murmured her name like a prayer, there was no room for shame. Only love. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the dark, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I was afraid of this," he said quietly. "Of what?" "Of how right it would feel. How complete." She understood. Loving someone meant risking loss again, meant opening yourself to pain, but it also meant opening yourself to joy. "We're worth the risk," she said. "Yeah, we are." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and Mara dreamed of futures instead of pasts. The next few weeks were a revelation. Not because anything external changed, but because everything internal did. They were still the same people, still did the same work, still faced the same challenges. But now they faced them as partners in every sense, as lovers, as a team bound by choice rather than necessity. The physical intimacy was wonderful, but it was the emotional intimacy that transformed Mara's life. Being able to share her fears and hopes and dreams with someone who actually cared. Being seen, truly seen and loved anyway. One morning in September, she woke before dawn to find Caleb already up, standing at the window. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Just thinking." She wrapped a blanket around herself and joined him. "About what?" "About how different things are from a year ago. This time last year, I was alone on this ranch, convincing myself I was fine, that I didn't need anyone. And now? Now I can't imagine being without you." He pulled her close. "You saved me, you know, from becoming a bitter, lonely old man." "I think you saved yourself. I just gave you a reason to." "We saved each other then," she smiled. "Deal." Later that morning, as they worked together repairing the chicken coop, a rider appeared on the horizon. Mara tensed automatically. Visitors still made her nervous after everything with Dalton. But this rider was young, maybe 17, and clearly exhausted. "You the Rourkes?" he called out. "Yes," Caleb said. "What do you need?" "Message from Ridge Creek. Helen Cartwright sent me." He handed over a folded paper. Said it was urgent. Caleb opened it, his expression darkening as he read. "What is it?" Mara asked. "Helen's ranch was vandalized, barn burned down, cattle scattered. She thinks it was Dalton's doing." Rage surged through Mara. "That bastard! She's calling a meeting. Tonight. All of us." Caleb looked at the messenger. "Tell her we'll be there." After the young man left, Mara paced the kitchen, fury making her restless. "He's escalating," she said. "First he tried to take our land. When that didn't work, he went after Helen, trying to break us apart. Prove he still has power." "So what do we do?" Caleb's jaw set in that stubborn line she'd come to recognize. "We show him he doesn't." That evening they rode to Ridge Creek together. The back room of the general store was packed, not just the usual women's group, but their husbands, sons, hired hands. Nearly 30 people crammed into a space meant for half that. Helen stood at the front, her face grim. Thanks for coming. You all know what happened. Dalton sent his men in the middle of the night, burned my barn, ran off half my herd, left this. She held up a piece of paper. A tax assessment. Claims I owe back taxes on my land. Convenient timing, don't you think? Angry murmurs rippled through the room. He's doing to you what he tried to do to us, Mara said, using his authority to steal your land. So we stop him, May said, same way we did before. Document everything, file complaints. Won't work this time, Helen interrupted. He's learned from his mistakes. This assessment looks legitimate. Got the territorial seal and everything. He's covered his tracks. Then what do we do? Ruth asked. Silence fell. Everyone looked at each other, searching for answers no one had. Then Alice spoke up, her raspy voice cutting through the quiet. We go over his head. To who? Someone asked. To the territorial governor. File a formal complaint about corruption. Get an investigation started. That could take months, Helen said. By then, he'll have seized my ranch. So we buy you time, Caleb said. All of us. We pool resources, help Helen pay whatever trumped-up taxes he's claiming. Then while she's fighting the seizure legally, we're building the case against Dalton. That's a lot of money, someone pointed out. So we all contribute what we can. Nobody gives more than they're able, but everyone gives something. Caleb looked around the room. We're stronger together than he is alone. That's the whole point. One by one, people nodded, started pledging amounts, some small, some substantial. Within an hour, they'd raised enough to cover Helen's assessment and then some. Mara watched in amazement. This was community, real community, built on mutual support and shared values. So different from Blackridge's hierarchy and judgment. Thank you, Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. All of you. I won't forget this. We're not done yet, May said. We need to document Dalton's harassment. Every incident, every threat, every shady deal. Build a case so strong even the governor can't ignore it. They worked late into the night, compiling evidence, writing statements, organizing their attack. Mara found herself taking notes, coordinating efforts, helping to build the framework of their resistance. When they finally left, well past midnight, Caleb looked at her with pride. You were amazing in there, he said. I just took notes. You did more than that. You helped organize 30 people into a cohesive force. That's leadership. The word felt foreign. Mara had never thought of herself as a leader, had spent her whole life trying to be invisible. But maybe that's what happened when you stopped hiding, when you stood up and fought back. You became the person you were always meant to be. Over the next few weeks, their campaign against Dalton intensified. They gathered evidence, interviewed people he'd wronged, built connections with territorial officials. It was slow, tedious work, but it was working. Dalton tried to fight back. More tax assessments appeared, targeting different members of their group. Inspections were ordered, permits challenged, every bureaucratic tool he had deployed to wear them down. But they didn't break. They adapted, helped each other, refused to be divided. One evening, Mara was going through paperwork when she found something interesting. A deed transfer from 3 years ago, signed by Dalton, that didn't quite match the property records. Caleb, look at this. He studied the documents, his eyes narrowing. This is fraud, clear as day. If we can prove it, we can prove he's been stealing land for years. Caleb looked up, excitement in his eyes. This is it. This is what we need. They took the evidence to May's husband, who had connections with the territorial marshal. Within days, an investigation was opened, not just into the specific fraud, but into Dalton's entire tenure as sheriff. The word spread through the county like wildfire. Dalton tried to suppress it, tried to use his authority to shut down the investigation. But it was too late. Too many people had come forward. Too much evidence had been gathered. On a cold October morning, the territorial marshal arrived in Blackridge with a warrant for Dalton's arrest. Mara and Caleb weren't there to see it. They heard about it secondhand, through Helen, who'd made a point of being in town that day. You should have seen his face, Helen said, grinning. All that smug certainty just gone, replaced by panic. What happens now? Mara asked. Now he goes to trial. Probably prison if the evidence holds up, which it will, and the county gets a new sheriff. It felt surreal. The man who'd terrorized them, who'd tried to steal their land and destroy their lives, was actually facing consequences. We did it, Mara said quietly. You did it, Helen corrected. You and Caleb. You stood up to him first, showed the rest of us it was possible. That night, back at the ranch, Mara and Caleb celebrated quietly. No party, no grand gestures. Just the two of them, sitting on the porch, watching the stars. I keep thinking about that day in the town square, Mara said, when you chose me. If someone had told me then that this is where we'd end up, would you have believed them? Not for a second. He pulled her close. Life's strange that way. The worst moments sometimes lead to the best ones. She thought about that, thought about all the pain and humiliation that had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life she'd built from nothing. I wouldn't change any of it, she said, not even the hard parts, because they all led here. To us. To us. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in the unlikeliest of ways and built something real from the wreckage of their pasts. The future was uncertain. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, more moments of doubt and fear, but they would face them together, and that made all the difference. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in mid-November and settling in to stay. Mara stood at the kitchen window, watching the flakes drift down, thinking about how different this winter felt from the last one. Then, she'd been new to the ranch, new to Caleb, new to the idea that her life could be anything other than what Blackridge had told her it was. Now she knew better. Now she knew herself. Lost in thought again, Caleb said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, just thinking about how much has changed. Good changes? The best changes. He kissed the top of her head. Helen sent word. The trial starts next week. She wants to know if we're going. Mara tensed slightly. The trial meant going back to Blackridge, facing all those people again. Part of her wanted to stay far away to let justice happen without her presence. But another part, the part that had grown stronger over the past year, knew she needed to be there, needed to see it through. We should go, she said. You sure? No, but we're going anyway. The day of the trial, they rode into Blackridge with Helen, May, and Ruth. The courthouse was packed, people standing in the aisles and crowding the doorway. Everyone wanted to see the powerful Sheriff Dalton brought low. Mara felt the familiar weight of eyes on her as they entered. The whispers started immediately, but this time they were different. That's the Rourke woman, the one who helped bring the case. Heard she organized the whole thing. Never thought she had it in her. The surprise in their voices should have bothered her, but it didn't. Let them be surprised. She'd stopped living for their expectations months ago. Dalton sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than Mara remembered. His authority stripped away. He was just a man facing consequences for his actions. He didn't look at her, didn't look at any of them, just stared straight ahead with the expression of someone who'd already accepted defeat. The trial lasted 3 days. Witness after witness took the stand, telling stories of intimidation, fraud, theft. The evidence was overwhelming. Even Dalton's lawyer seemed to know it was hopeless. On the third day, Mara was called to testify. Her hand shook as she walked to the stand, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom on her. The prosecutor was a stern woman from the territorial capital. Mrs. Rourke, can you describe your interactions with Sheriff Dalton? Mara took a breath and told the truth. About the forced marriage ceremony, about the delayed deed, about the attempt to steal their land. She kept her voice steady, her facts clear. When Dalton's lawyer tried to rattle her on cross-examination, suggesting she was exaggerating or lying, she didn't waver. Are you calling me a liar? She asked calmly. I'm suggesting your memory might be influenced by emotion. My memory is fine, and so is my documentation. Everything I've said is backed up by written records and witness testimony. The lawyer had no response to that. As Mara stepped down from the stand, she caught sight of her mother in the back of the courtroom. Elizabeth Quinn's face was pale, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met for just a moment, then Elizabeth looked away. Mara felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no need for reconciliation, just indifference. Her mother had no power over her anymore. The verdict came on the 4th day. Guilty on all counts. Dalton was sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison and ordered to make restitution to everyone he'd defrauded. The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers. Mara sat quietly, feeling Caleb's hand find hers under the table. It's over, he said. Yeah, it is. After the trial, people wanted to congratulate them, shake their hands, tell them how brave they'd been. Mara accepted the praise awkwardly, still not used to being seen as someone worthy of admiration. As they were leaving the courthouse, a small figure approached, Bess, Mara's younger sister, looking nervous and hopeful. Mara, can we talk? Mara glanced at Caleb, who nodded and stepped away to give them privacy. What do you want, Bess? I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For not standing up for you, for letting Mother treat you the way she did, for being too scared to You were a kid, Mara interrupted. You didn't have any power to change things. I could have been kinder, could have been a real sister instead of just not making it worse. There was genuine remorse in Bess's eyes. Mara felt some of the old hurt loosen slightly. How are you? Mara asked. I'm okay. Married Thomas Morrison last month. We're happy, I think. Bess twisted her hands together. Mother's not doing well. She's gotten bitter, angry all the time. Father barely speaks to her anymore. That's not my problem. I know. I'm not asking you to forgive her or come back or anything like that. I just thought you should know. Bess took a breath. And I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. What you did here, standing up to Dalton, building a life for yourself. It's incredible. You're incredible. The words hit harder than Mara expected. This was what she'd wanted as a child, wasn't it? Her sister's approval, her admiration. But now that she had it, it felt less important than she'd thought it would. Thank you, Mara said. I hope you're happy with Thomas. I hope you build a good life. Can I visit sometime? Your ranch? Mara considered. Maybe. Someday. But not yet. I'm not ready. Bess nodded, understanding. They parted awkwardly, two sisters who'd been shaped by the same cruelty but had emerged in different forms. On the ride back to the ranch, Helen was jubilant. Did you see his face when they read the verdict? Priceless. Absolutely priceless. Justice feels good, May agreed, but Mara was quiet, processing. The trial had brought closure, yes, but it had also stirred up old feelings she thought she'd buried. Seeing her mother, talking to Bess, walking through Blackridge's streets again, it was harder than she'd expected. That night, she and Caleb lay in bed, her head on his chest. You okay? He asked. I don't know. I thought I'd feel better after the trial, vindicated or something. Instead, I just feel tired. That's normal. You've been carrying a lot. I saw my mother today, in the courtroom. Did you talk to her? No, but Bess talked to me after. Said Mother's miserable now. And how do you feel about that? Mara thought about it. I don't feel anything, and that scares me a little. Shouldn't I feel something? She's still my mother. Being someone's mother doesn't automatically make them worthy of your emotions. She had years to love you and chose not to. You don't owe her anything, including your pain. When did you get so wise? Probably around the time I married a woman who taught me what real strength looks like. She smiled despite herself. Flatterer. Just honest. They fell silent, and Mara let herself absorb the peace of the moment. The trial was over. Dalton was going to prison. Her old life in Blackridge was truly behind her now. All that remained was figuring out what came next. December brought brutal cold and snow that piled higher than the fence posts. They were snowed in for days at a time, the ranch isolated from the world. But unlike the previous winter, Mara didn't feel trapped. She felt safe, cocooned with Caleb in their small, warm house while the world outside turned white and silent. They spent the long evenings talking, playing cards, reading aloud from the few books they owned. Caleb taught her to play chess, and she was terrible at it but loved it anyway. She taught him to knit, and he was even worse, producing a scarf so misshapen they both laughed until they cried. One night, as they sat by the fire, Caleb said, I've been thinking about expanding the ranch. How so? Get more cattle, maybe some sheep, build another barn, maybe hire help so we're not doing everything ourselves. That's ambitious. It is. But I think we could do it, together. He looked at her. What do you think? I think you're asking my opinion like it matters. It does matter. This is our ranch, our life. We make these decisions together. The casual way he said it, the assumption of partnership, of equality, still made her heart swell. A year ago, no one had asked her opinion on anything, Now her husband treated her like an equal partner in building their future. "I think it's a good idea," she said, "but we should talk to Helen and the others, see if they have advice." "Smart. We'll bring it up at the next meeting." But before the next meeting could happen, something else occurred that changed everything. Mara had been feeling off for a few weeks, tired, queasy in the mornings, her emotions swinging unpredictably. She'd chalked it up to stress from the trial, from the hard work of ranch life. Then her monthly bleeding didn't come. She waited another week, telling herself it was nothing, that her body was just adjusting to the physical demands of her life. But when the second week passed with no change, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, mind racing. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Terror and joy warred inside her. She'd never really thought about being a mother, had assumed that like everything else good in life, it wasn't meant for her. But here she was, 23 years old and carrying a child. Caleb's child. She had to tell him. But the words wouldn't come. What if he wasn't ready? What if the memory of losing his daughter was too fresh? What if this was too much, too soon? 3 days she carried the knowledge alone, trying to find the right moment, the right words. Finally, one evening, as they prepared dinner together, she just blurted it out. "I'm pregnant." Caleb dropped the knife he'd been using to cut bread. It clattered on the table. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 2 months, I think." He stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, fear, joy, more fear. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure, yeah." He sat down heavily, like his legs wouldn't hold him. Mara's heart sank. This was what she'd been afraid of, that he'd see this as a replacement for what he'd lost, a painful reminder of Sarah and their daughter. "Say something," she whispered. When he looked up, there were tears on his face. "I'm going to be a father again." "Are you? Is that okay? I know with Sarah and your daughter, this isn't about them. This is about us, about our child." He stood, crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. "I'm terrified, absolutely terrified, but I'm also happier than I've been in years." She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He pulled back to look at her. "How are you feeling? Are you okay? Do you need to see a doctor?" "I'm fine, just tired and queasy sometimes. Helen will know a midwife we can talk to." Over the next few weeks, the news spread through their community. Helen was delighted, immediately taking charge of preparing Mara for motherhood. Ruth shared advice from her own pregnancies. The other women rallied around her with support and practical help. Even May, usually gruff and no-nonsense, softened when she found out. "A baby? That's good. That's real good." The pregnancy wasn't easy. Mara was sick most mornings, exhausted by afternoon, her body changing in ways that sometimes frightened her. But Caleb was patient, taking on more of the work, making sure she rested, bringing her tea when she couldn't keep food down. "I feel useless," she said one day, frustrated by her own weakness. "You're growing a person. That's the opposite of useless. I can barely help with the ranch. The ranch will survive. You're more important." It was strange being prioritized, being treated as precious. Mara had spent so long being told she was too much that being told she was important felt almost wrong. But she was learning to accept it, learning to believe that she deserved care and consideration. Winter gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath. Mara's belly grew, stretching her dresses until Helen had to help her sew new ones. She felt huge and awkward and beautiful all at once. In April, a letter arrived from the territorial capital. The new sheriff, a fair man recommended by the governor himself, had completed his investigation into Dalton's crimes. Additional fraud had been uncovered, and more land was being returned to its rightful owners. Enclosed with the letter was a check. Restitution for the pain and suffering Dalton had caused them. Caleb stared at the amount. "This is enough to expand the ranch twice over, or to build something new," Mara said. An idea had been forming in her mind for weeks. Helen mentioned once that the county needs a school. The one in Blackridge is the only one for 100 miles. "You want to build a school?" "I want to build a place where kids aren't made to feel worthless because they're different, where a girl who doesn't fit the mold isn't told to serve refreshments instead of dancing." Her hand went to her belly. "I want something better for our child, for all the children." Caleb's eyes softened. Then we'll build a school. Over the next few months, they worked with the community to make it happen. Helen donated land. May's husband provided lumber at cost. Ruth helped design the curriculum. Even people who weren't part of their core group contributed: money, labor, materials. The school began to take shape on a piece of land halfway between Ridge Creek and several other small settlements. Not in Black Ridge. Mara refused to build anything in the town that had rejected her. This school would be different. Open to all children regardless of their family's standing or ability to pay. Taught by teachers who believed every child had worth. In June, as Mara's pregnancy entered its final weeks, the school was nearly complete. She stood looking at it, this building that represented everything she'd never had and everything she hoped to give her child. "It's beautiful," Caleb said, standing beside her. "It's necessary." "That too." They were quiet for a moment. Then Caleb said, "Have you thought about names? For the baby?" "No, for the school." He grinned at her expression. "Yes, for the baby. I was thinking, if it's a girl, maybe Rose. Simple, strong. If it's a boy—" She hesitated. "Would it bother you if we didn't use your daughter's name? I don't want to replace her or—" "We're not replacing her. We're honoring what she meant to me by building a new life. A different life." He took her hand. "Whatever name you choose will be perfect." The baby came on a sweltering July night, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Helen and the midwife arrived quickly, taking over the bedroom with efficient competence. Caleb paced outside, relegated to the kitchen, his footsteps wearing a path in the floorboards. Labor was brutal, hours of pain that Mara hadn't known existed. She screamed and cried and cursed Caleb for doing this to her, and Helen just laughed and said that was normal. Finally, as dawn broke over the horizon, a baby's cry filled the house. "It's a girl," the midwife announced. "Healthy lungs on this one." They cleaned her up and placed her in Mara's arms. Mara looked down at the tiny, wrinkled, perfect face and felt something fundamental shift inside her. This was her daughter, her child, a person she would love and protect and raise to know her own worth. "She's beautiful," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "She looks like an angry potato." He laughed. "The most beautiful angry potato I've ever seen." Mara traced her daughter's tiny features. "Rose. Her name is Rose." "Rose Rourke." Caleb tested it out. "Perfect." Helen poked her head in. "How we doing?" "Good," Mara said. "Tired, but good." "You did great. Real great." Helen's eyes were suspiciously shiny. "I'll let you three have some time together." After everyone left, Mara and Caleb sat together on the bed, their daughter between them. "I'm terrified," Mara admitted. "What if I'm a terrible mother? What if I mess her up the way my mother messed me up?" "You won't." "How do you know?" "Because you know what it feels like to be unloved. You'll do everything in your power to make sure she never feels that way." He kissed Mara's forehead. "And because you're brave and strong and the most capable person I know." "I'm not that brave." "You married a stranger to escape a terrible situation. You stood up to a corrupt sheriff. You helped build a school from nothing. You just gave birth to our daughter." He looked at her seriously. "Mara, you're the bravest person I've ever met." She wanted to argue, but looking at the tiny person in her arms, she felt a fierce protectiveness that made bravery seem like the only option. She would be brave for Rose, would fight for her, protect her, teach her that she was worthy of love and respect, would give her everything Mara never had. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful. Rose was a demanding baby, crying often, sleeping rarely, requiring constant attention. But Mara had never been happier. Even in the depths of sleep deprivation, covered in spit-up, hair unwashed for days, she felt more complete than she ever had. The community rallied around them. Helen brought meals. Ruth offered childcare advice. May's wife gave them baby clothes her own children had outgrown. Even women Mara barely knew stopped by with gifts and congratulations. She was no longer the girl who'd stood alone at the end of the line in Blackridge's town square. She was part of something, connected to people who cared about her well-being. In September, the school opened with 12 students and 1 teacher, a young woman from the territorial capital who believed in education for all children. Mara attended the opening ceremony with Rose in her arms, Caleb beside her. The teacher, Miss Patricia Stone, gave a short speech about the importance of treating every child as valuable. of recognizing that intelligence and worth came in many forms. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she'd needed as a child. Someone to tell her she mattered. Someone to see her potential instead of her flaws. After the ceremony, several people approached her. "This school is a wonderful thing," an older woman said. "My grandson is here. He's different. Struggles with reading. Other schools gave up on him. But Miss Stone says she can help." "I hope she can," Mara said. "It's because of you this place exists, you and your husband. Thank you." The gratitude in the woman's voice made Mara uncomfortable. She still wasn't used to being thanked, being recognized as someone who could create good things. But she was learning. That winter, the second one since Rose's birth, Mara stood at the kitchen window watching snow fall. Rose was napping, Caleb was in the barn, and the house was quiet. She thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago, scared, broken, convinced of her own worthlessness. That girl felt like a stranger now, not because everything had magically become perfect. Mara still had days where the old doubts crept in, still heard her mother's voice sometimes, criticizing, judging, still felt awkward in social situations, uncertain of her place. But those moments were fewer now, overshadowed by the knowledge that she'd built something real, a marriage based on genuine love, a daughter who would grow up knowing her worth, a community that valued her contribution, a life that was hers. The door opened and Caleb came in, stamping snow off his boots. "Rose still sleeping?" he asked. "For now, won't last long." He crossed to her, pulled her into an embrace. "What are you thinking about?" "How different everything is from 2 years ago." "Good different?" "The best different." She looked up at him. "Thank you. For choosing me that day. For seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. I didn't see anything that wasn't already there. You just needed someone to point it out. Still, thank you." They stood together in the warm kitchen, holding each other, as snow fell outside and their daughter slept peacefully in the next room. Mara thought about Black Ridge, about her mother, about all the people who told her she was too much or not enough. She could forgive them now, maybe, or at least stop letting their opinions matter, because here was the truth she'd learned. No one else gets to define your worth. Not your family, not your town, not the voice in your head that sounds like everyone who ever hurt you. You define yourself. By your actions, your choices, your refusal to accept the limitations others try to impose. Mara had been told her whole life that she was worthless, and she'd almost believed it. But then a stranger had chosen her, and in choosing her had given her the space to choose herself, to discover that the problem had never been her body, her personality, her very existence. The problem had been people who needed someone to look down on to feel better about themselves. And the solution had been walking away, building something new, surrounding herself with people who saw her value. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no magic transformation, no revenge fantasy where everyone who'd wronged her suffered. Life was messier than that, more complicated. But it was her life, messy and complicated and absolutely hers, and that was enough. That was everything. Rose woke with a cry from the bedroom. Mara started to pull away to get her, but Caleb stopped her. "I'll get her. You rest." He disappeared into the bedroom. Mara heard him talking softly to their daughter, his voice full of love and warmth. She thought about Rose growing up here, learning to ride, to work the land, to stand up for herself, attending the school they'd built where teachers would value her mind regardless of how her body looked or how her personality presented. Growing up knowing she was loved, wanted, worthy. Everything Mara had never had, everything she would make sure her daughter never lacked. Caleb emerged with Rose, who'd stopped crying and was now looking around with curious eyes. "Someone wants her mother," he said, handing over the baby. Mara took Rose, settled into the rocking chair by the window. As she nursed, watching the snow fall, she felt a peace settle over her that she'd never known was possible. This was home. This small ranch in the middle of nowhere, with a husband who loved her and a daughter who would never doubt her worth and friends who showed up when it mattered. This was the life she'd built from the ashes of the one she'd been born into. And it was beautiful. Not perfect. Never perfect. There would be more hard times, more challenges, more moments of doubt. But she would face them. With Caleb beside her, with Rose in her arms, with a community at her back. She would face them, and she would survive. Because that's what she did. That's who she was. Not worthless, not broken, not too much or not enough. Just Mara. And Mara was exactly who she needed to be. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. Inside, the fire crackled and Baby Rose made soft, contented sounds and Caleb hummed as he prepared dinner. And Mara sat in her rocking chair holding her daughter and felt something she'd spent 23 years searching for. She felt whole,